Welcome to Sanity, a podcast by the New York Sun. My name is A.R. Hoffman, and every week I'll be joined by my co-host, Rebecca Sugar, to bring a little bit of sanity to your week by making sense out of the nonsense.
Every week we like to start the show with a little quote about sanity. And this week's comes from the great British author and writer G.K. Chesterton, who said, "Facts themselves can often feed the flame of madness because sanity is a spirit." And I felt like that's going to be really useful when we talk about some of the things we're going to talk about today.
Absolutely. Chesterton was kind of an intense guy.
Yeah, witty guy.
Witty guy.
Very quotable.
This week we have a lot to cover, and we're excited to share it with you. Our top story, we'll call it Art of the Deal. That's all the negotiations about tariffs and government shutdowns and the state of the economy. Our Make It Make Sense section will be the attempted deportation of Mahmoud Khalil, the leader of the Colombia encampments, and we'll break all that down for you. Our tipping point this week is going to be Russia.
It always is.
It always is. Tipping point in Moscow, and then we'll have a lot more for you towards the end of our show. Rebecca, we're starting off with the art of the deal and with the economy.
Right, that's my cue. I don't know exactly what to say about the continuing resolution because there's always a continuing resolution. It sort of feels like here we are again. Mm-hmm. There's so many ironies built in. You know, all the clips of Schumer. Senator Schumer not too long ago sort of railing against shutdowns as the worst thing that could ever happen to democracy, and now talking about shutdowns as the best thing that could ever happen to democracy. And so all the irony and the hypocrisy is lost on no one, I think. I'm more interested in the tariffs, which have been sort of a roller coaster ride and probably not fun for people trying to plan their business, but fun to watch, I guess.
Or people who are looking to, buy another bottle of Jameson or Tullamore
right,
Dew.
I know.
Or even a nice bottle of Bordeaux.
You don't mess with the alcohol, I guess, but he's going to. I think the overall take I have on the tariffs is that it's really an issue of style versus substance. We talk about that a lot when we talk about Trump. Not clear to me. I think there's a really healthy debate about tariffs economically and what their impact will be on the economy and whether they're good or fair and how other countries have tariffed us and we haven't done it in response. I leave that for the Larry Kudlows of the world to talk about in the pages of The Sun. But I think the style, Trump's style when he does this is what a lot of people react to, sort of 10%. No, I'm switching it to 20%. It's on, it's off. Often Trump's style is used as part of his art of the deal, his negotiating sort of posture. And, you've seen it work in some cases. It certainly reversed Premier Ford in Canada sort of seemingly overnight. And there was so much consternation when Trump first announced the tariffs and then Premier Ford announced a 25% tariff on electricity to the United States. And everyone was just sort of, in the media anyway, was losing their mind over the consequences, the dire consequences for Americans. And then before you woke up in the morning, he's coming for a little visit because nobody wants this, right? So this is part of Trump's negotiating style. And I just wanted to also point out another really interesting moment, get your take on it, when the Irish Prime Minister was meeting with Trump and literally sitting next to him. I think he likes these Oval Office dust-ups, the Prime Minister is sitting next to him and Trump is basically saying not just, hey, all of our pharma companies went to Ireland because of your, unfair policies towards us, and so we're going to tariff the heck out of you. But he even extended it to a general comment about the EU and how it's us versus them, and that's another theme we talk about all the time.
Ripping us off, yeah. Just to start with the government shutdown, you're absolutely right. The world looks different when you're in the minority versus the majority, and certainly the Democrats are now planning to filibuster or threatening to filibuster and being the proverbial stick in the mud. I think one of the things that's impressed me is the cohesion of the Republican caucus. And here I think we really have to kind of give credit to Mike Johnson. I mean, this guy no one had ever heard of him, lawmaker from Louisiana. I've interviewed him for The Sun. I was impressed with his sort of not only political savvy, but seemingly affable nature. And I think he's really grown into the role of Speaker of the House. And he came into it not necessarily the favored choice. And he's really, I think, carving out a pretty impressive legacy.
Do you think the Democrats are going to really take this to a shutdown? I don't. Do you think that?
I don't either. Although I would say that there is some downside for Trump here. I mean, I think for a lot of Americans, they'll say, wait, you control the White House, you control the Senate, and you control the House. At a certain point, I think the Republicans, there's interest, I think, all around in some kind of deal, getting done. And certainly the newfound Republican unity, which includes nearly everyone except Thomas Massie these days, strengthens Trump's hand. I mean, there was a time when Republicans were mostly negotiating with themselves, and now at least they have a united front. But Democrats don't really have a lot of options here besides the filibuster, and that's a kind of almost like a kryptonite tool where you use it, but it could harm you and it could backfire. So we'll see what Chuck apparently a Palestinian heritage as Trump has taken to.
Oh, there's so many good moments this week.
To say I'm with you about Trump, how much Trump loves those Oval Office. I look forward to the Criterion collection of just clips of foreign heads of state in the Oval Office.
I mean, who would be dumb enough to now come as a head of a foreign state to the Oval Office? It's like a setup. I wouldn't
I'm
show
not
up
sure
if I
folks
were
can
you.
see on the camera what socks I'm wearing, but I don't know if you saw that moment where Trump said, "I'm distracted. I'm just looking at JD's socks. I can't focus." Yeah, but back to the economy, Rebecca. I'm totally with you. I think tariffs are, Trump has said it's a beautiful word. I think seeing it just as an economic tool is missing. For him, tariffs are almost this magic key. I mean, he uses them as a political object, as a foreign policy object, as an economic cudgel. But I think Republicans have to worry a little bit about the economy. Poll numbers suggest that Trump's trust on the economy is declining. Obviously, he promised kind of widespread prosperity. The economy is jittery right now. It's like maybe after you've had, 4 Diet Cokes before 10 a.m. It's no judgment,
Coke Zero.
but or me coffee. But there's things seem a little unsettled.
Yeah, the polls definitely reflect that, and Trump's language starting to reflect it. Right, he's talking about bumps along the way. He's preparing people, and all of his spokespeople are talking about they're sort of trying to moderate expectations and say the adult thing, which is there is no party, there is no president, there is no one person in Congress who could cure our economic woes at the moment. We're going to have to go through, it's the ripping of the Band-Aid, we're going to have to go through a little bit of pain. How long he can maintain that. And
although I think, though, most Americans it's one thing to go through that process if there's a kind of clearly defined path and a clearly defined goal. I mean, I think
clarity is the key.
We all agree that we'd like to see more and more manufacturing in this country. We'd all agree that the offshoring of jobs has really harmed so many folks and in the middle of the country and elsewhere. The question is, is there a method to the madness? And our Americans, I think, are already becoming a little nervous at that. Maybe there's a lot of zigging and zagging, but is there a through line?
Although, just to be fair, there was a lot of madness before this, and this idea of is there a method to the madness that question wasn't often asked of prior administrations who put us in a hole. Fake jobs numbers or massage numbers. We were not in good shape, and nobody was sort of talking about style, substance, plans, clarity. It's just the way Trump's demeanor brings that question to the fore. But I think it might have been asked sooner as well.
Maybe, although the market. The market is the market, and I think people, they see that
Main Street's
those numbers,
Main Street
those
too.
numbers going down. Well, we'll see. I mean, you can make the argument that inflation and cost of living dealt the Democrats a defeat, and that same gravity is going to apply to Trump. But it's early days.
Yeah, it's early days. That's right.
I think another part that's interesting for me about the sort of Democrats and the shutdown is sort of, one of the stories we've been talking about on this program is can the Democrats kind of figure out how to properly be an opposition party. And this is one way to do it. We covered their sort of utter failure to do it at that joint address to Congress. It was a clown show. So I think one of the issues is having good leadership, having good issues, and having good strategy. And it feels like they're sort of grasping, at all those straws. Some kind of political gossip we're hearing around the internet and maybe in back rooms. One of them is that Rahm Emanuel is preparing for a run in 2028, back off his time in Tokyo eating sushi and sashimi. I think I'd take that job over being president, but maybe that's just I'm a sushi lover. And Pete Buttigieg seems to be thinking about it. Gavin Newsom having Steve Bannon on his radio program.
It's become a proper centrist, this Gavin Newsom.
Right. There's still not a hair out of place, but he's now a centrist. So we'll be watching all those stories, but there's kind of fun jockeying behind the scenes.
Yeah, look, I think this issue of the Democrats finding their footing also applies exactly to this CR debate and all the debates around DOGE. I mean, the CR debate is attached to the DOGE issue in that the Democrats keep insisting that there be amendments, which largely have to do with restricting Elon Musk's work through DOGE. And their concern over that, their fear over that doesn't read well to the public. It's one of these 80-20 issues. I don't know why you could guess why they don't want us to continue to go down that road. But from a public perception point of view, they look like scared rabbits. They look like they're about to be exposed. They've already been exposed to some degree, not just them, Republicans too, all members of Congress who had their hand in the cookie jar. But the Democrats look like they're literally trying to stop the very thing that Americans want the most, which is transparency.
I agree with you. I think I'm working on a story now about some of the legal roadblocks that DOGE is facing. And inevitably, I mean, it's something new, something kind of a strange creation of the federal government. But I think it's fair to say that these first however many couple hundred days or a couple months has been kind of a sprint, and then a lot's gotten done and a lot of China's been broken and all that. And then I think we're at a period maybe where we're sort of settling into a little bit more of almost like a trench warfare period, where Trump is going to be more encumbered by the courts. And also, we're already starting to see some Republican representatives, as you said, are uncomfortable with these cuts too. And their constituents are letting them know. So, we're kind of, the dust is, I think, about to start to settle, and we'll see what happens next.
Maybe they're even more concerned, not just with the cuts. That's what they say they're concerned with. I think a lot of people are concerned about the implications of what we uncover and who has been giving money to their friends and to NGOs that their friends lead or their family members lead. And I think that cuts across both sides of the aisle. And I think that's the real fear.
Yeah. I mean, there's also, in terms of the DOGE question, one of the really fascinating kind of subplots for me, Rebecca, is the way in the kind of contest between Musk and the cabinet members. And if you're, Marco Rubio or whoever, Scott Bessent, how do you who's running policy, and more than who's running policy, kind of just the egos and the sort of power struggle behind the scenes. Trump has always enjoyed this kind of, fomented sort of rivalries and people kind of angling for advantage. But that's another kind of story to watch.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to Make It Make Sense. This is about Mahmoud Khalil, the Columbia University graduate student who was
former graduate.
Yes. He's 30 years old, even though everyone calls him a kid. He's 30. He was head of Columbia University apartheid divest and was taken into custody. He's now in Louisiana. He's awaiting a hearing to see if he's going to be deported. Marco Rubio has sort of stated that he has the legitimate right to deport him. He's a visa holder in the United States. He's married to a U.S. citizen. I think there are a couple of ways to look at this story. I think we put it in Make It Make Sense because there are a lot of legal questions here, and I think we want to dig into the meat of that. As I see it, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but as I see it and as I read the statutes and the laws here, I think Marco Rubio has every legal right to remove him because the law itself is the language is pretty broad in terms of visa holders and what they can be deported for. And I think there were a couple of, there was a Supreme Court decision that sort of broadened that out even more to include language. So a lot of the conversation has been about free speech. And I would posit from what I've understood of the law that actually not that you're not entitled to free speech. It's a different question. It's the wrong question. As a visa holder, if you are seen to have provided material support for a terrorist organization, or even just supporting or providing aid, and those words are very broadly defined to a terrorist group, you are deportable. Your visa can be revoked. And I don't see any argument here that can be made otherwise in this particular case. Whether or not that should be the law is, I think, what people are arguing about. And that's a different argument. And I also would say a visa, to me, is sort of this holding period, right, until you get your citizenship. And in that period, why do we have a holding period? Because we kind of want to determine if you are suitable to be a citizen of this country. This is a privilege to be a citizen of this country, right? So if you come here...
You can almost say like a regular visa is almost like going on a couple dates, right? You're kind of this probationary period.
A green card, promise ring.
A green card is maybe a little bit more like an engagement, but still not a wedding.
Breakable.
Right.
Right. People have done that. And so, this is a time period in which, you could come in and say to this country and say, no, I don't believe in terrorism. And yes, I love the country. And then if we gave you citizenship a week later, you could have at it, right? This is the period to say, behave like an American and show us who you are before we let you in. And it's our prerogative to let you in or not. So in that time period, if someone is here and their daily concern, which Khalil seems to have almost been, is to participate not just in standing on a soapbox and saying, I hate America, which I think even though an American citizen, I would defend their right to say that. I wonder if I would admit a visa applicant as a citizen if they were doing that every day. That's a different question. But he was also inciting to violence and participating in an organization that broke into buildings and actually violated the law. And so
3 separate break-ins going back to the Hamilton Hall.
Yes, he has a history of this. He was suspended by his own school for a time too. So he's not some guy they just plucked off the street.
Right.
And so I think we have every right to ask ourselves meaning American citizens, who do we want in this country? And if we don't want certain kinds of people, we should be allowed to say no to them. And then I want to pursue with you this idea of the slippery slope of what I just said and what that could lead to. So can you just start with like the legal parameters around this? And am I correct in what I just laid out? And how do you feel about it?
Sure. No, I mean, the first thing to say, I think, is that, the schools have totally defaulted in their obligation to enforce their own rules and to provide safe learning environments, right? That to me is the original sin here. I mean, Mahmoud Khalil should have been expelled, right? And if he had been expelled, he would not now be deported, right? So the schools' failures to enforce their own rules, and schools have far greater latitude, even if they take federal funding, than the government itself, which is held to a much higher standard, has created a situation where now the government has stepped in. And you could see this train coming a mile away. It was part of, for over a year, I've been saying, enforce your own rules to these schools. And they refuse, and they refuse, and they refuse.
And they refuse. And sorry to interrupt, but just to say, yesterday I was with some friends whose children are at Columbia, and they got emails from the administration, which basically said, well, a complete lack of accountability here for everything that you just said, even in this moment.
Right.
So they are not going to change that behavior.
Right. And, so the second thing to say is that the Trump administration picked a tough target here because he's a green card holder. It would have been a lot easier to deport someone on a student visa. So, this is a high stakes kind of a move.
Right.
I agree with you. I think the free speech thing is I'd say, sort of a red herring here, but not entirely. I mean, I think there are good faith arguments being made that that a lot of the alleged activity is in kind of a gray zone, especially, right, because he hasn't been charged with a crime.
But you don't have to be.
You don't have to be. I'm just sort of laying it out. I mean, so there's not that kind of easy peg, right? We're in an area that is a little bit more contested, and we're seeing that. So just to sort of catch people up, he's in Louisiana. There was a hearing on Wednesday. The judge didn't order his immediate release, importantly, which suggests that this is not entirely an absurd thing to do. So okay, so then we turn to the actual legal questions, and there are statutes on the books under the Immigration and Naturalization Services Act that say it is against the law for a green card holder to, quote, espouse or endorse terrorist activity. Mm-hmm. It seems clear he did that. Mm-hmm. I don't even think that's contested. Right, it's clear that the group he was leading cheered on Hamas, that the encampments had a no Zionist allowed area, that they revoked the apology from a member of the group who said, I want to kill Zionists. Flyers were handed out that celebrates Sinwar and Khania and the whole rogues gallery. So there's no real question here.
He called, I'm just going to quote him, he called for, or the group for which he works, this or that he's involved in, the Columbia University Apartheid Divest. But he was a leader, one of the leaders of the group. He wasn't just some member. Yeah. That group said, we're fighting for the total eradication of Western civilization. We seek instructions from militants in the global South. Now, again, people would say that's speech. Mm-hmm. And some people would say, well, that's incitement. Right. So there's a line. But either way, even if it's just speech, my point is, if you were an American citizen and just said, we're fighting for the total eradication of Western civilization, you'd say free speech. He's allowed to say that. But as a visa holder, that could be grounds under the statute you just cited to remove him.
So two things. I mean, one is that our constitutional protections extended to sort of people who hold green cards is a contested question. Mm-hmm. You're absolutely right that if this was an American citizen, it's pretty unlikely that this would be prosecuted, right? It would be within the wide ambit of free speech. But again, this isn't a citizen. And we go there back to your initial sort of explanation that of the kind of broader framework of like what is a visa holder, right? And what protections are they afforded? I think the other wrinkle here is that there was more than just speech going on, mm-hmm. right? I mean, this was organizing takeovers and that were violent. But again, is that criminal? Like, well, it hasn't been charged, but maybe that's not the standard.
And is there a difference between being a leader in an organization that does those takeovers and being the person caught on camera doing the act?
Well, both can be prosecuted. I mean, this was the case with, let's say, January 6th, right? I mean, we had prosecutions both of the people in the Capitol and people like
strolling around outside.
But even the people who were like at a remove who had planned it, yes. people like Stuart Rhodes and even Trump,
right?
I mean, so the culpability doesn't require you to be physically present. I mean, this is part of there's a broader issue here, and with any kind of controversy, I always say, what is the range of reasonable opinions and who can disagree? And I think on this issue, I do think reasonable people can disagree on where free speech here ends. The standard for deportation. I mean, I think there's a question here: are these statutes constitutional? I could see a challenge coming up on these statutes. Mm-hmm. But where there is no reasonable ground for disagreement is the lionization mm-hmm. of this guy, mm-hmm. The celebration of him. I was appalled by the Senate Democratic Senate Judiciary putting out a tweet on X saying "Free Mahmoud Khalil," making it a cause
This is what turned Chuck Schumer into a Palestinian.
Right. That to me is way over the line.
Yes.
It's why I would never feel comfortable, obviously, attending any kind of march in support of him. And the scenes down at the courthouse yesterday. So
or look at his legal representation. Yeah. Of the likes that no J6er was afforded. Nobody would touch any of those people, and they're lining up to defend Khalil.
And he was defending Hamas, which of course engaged in hostage taking of the most brutal and appalling kind. So spare me the kind of crocodile tears about the pregnant wife and this and that. Forget about all that.
Yeah. And he's no kid, we should say, right? Did we say that already? He's 30. He's not a kid.
Forget about all that, right? This is a bad guy in the service of a awful ideology. Right.
Now, can I just present you with maybe it's the far right and the far left argument that I've seen on social media that maybe they've joined forces on this, which is if that's your standard, bad guys or visa holders who espouse, views that are anti-American, why couldn't that standard be defined in a million different ways. That would be offensive to us, right? People would be thrown out of the country whose voices and views we liked. But maybe even more importantly, people are saying he wasn't anti-American, although he clearly was anti-Western civilization, and we're in it. But they are pointing to the fact that this was about Hamas and Israel, and why are Americans throwing out visa holders who are anti-Israel? And what's your answer to those people?
Yeah, I mean, the technical legal answer would be that Hamas is an American-labeled terrorist organization, right? And so in supporting it, you're not breaking Israeli law, you're breaking American law. But this is a test case. I mean, there's no question that this is at the frontier of governmental powers, and I think we'll see more of it. Not to say we'll see this draconian crackdown, but that I do think we're going to see more of these kind of efforts to have an ideological inflection to immigration enforcement. And whether you see that as a positive or negative sort of depends where you sit.
Some people, say that Trump picked this guy and didn't do his homework. And I have the opposite view. I think he actually picked this for all the reasons you're suggesting, because it is such a test case and because it is such a bold choice, like in the way that he's done with his presidential executive powers. He's testing the limits, and he knows he's going to lose a few. He's hoping he'll win more than he loses, but he wants to reset the boundaries. I think he has to win this one if he wants to move forward.
I'm more skeptical, Rebecca. I think
you don't think he will win it.
Well, I think the judge who's now is hearing the case is a very brilliant judge, but a man of the left, an Obama appointee. Also, coincidentally, his family is very involved in New York Jewish life.
Yes,
but we'll see. I mean, if the case somehow goes to the Louisiana courts, I think we'll see a different outcome. Not to be sort of just say it's all about the judges, but I do think this is one of those cases. I think where the ideological predilection of the judge is going to be really important.
But it wouldn't stop at this judge, or would it?
It wouldn't stop at this judge, but if the case kind of lives within the New York courts, it would go up and down the New York courts as opposed to the Louisiana ones. I think this could be a whole separate conversation, the sort of the kind of battles you pick. It reminds me a little bit of in Trump's first term with the kind of Muslim ban, right? And that was overturned.
The not Muslim ban.
Not Muslim, but he came back with a edited version. So just to say, I think you're right that there are payoffs to picking difficult legal battles, and this is coincidentally done all the time on the right and the left. It's called impact litigation. You pick a case specifically because you think it can make new law and get to the Supreme Court. This is how the people pick plaintiffs for abortion cases or religious liberty cases or all of that. So, you can also lose those cases. Right.
It's a risk.
It's a risk.
Yeah.
We're seeing, the real push now on universities. I mean, we didn't even talk about, the $400 million cut in federal funding. And so universities are certainly feeling the squeeze.
Does it even matter?
But again, they should have done their job.
Yeah. They should have done their job. And then maybe we'll just double down on this next time, because there are other questions also. This would bring up the question of, we have 1.1, I think, million or just under that international students in America. There are great reasons to have students from other countries here that have nothing to do with the fact that they're full paying, tuition payers. But so there are real reasons socially and foreign policy wise that you want foreign students here. But this might raise the question, how many do we want and need? How many student visas should we be handing out? It opens up a lot of questions, I think, that are way beyond just Mr. Khalil.
And this case is not going to be finished in a few days. I mean, it's really going to drag on. And who knows, it could eventually end up at the Supreme Court. I mean, how cool would that be?
So much fun for you. And you love talking about Columbia and Barnard, I know. So this will just be months and months of joy for Ari Hoffman. Okay, should we move on to Tipping Point?
Yes.
We're going to go into the Russia-Ukraine situation. We talked about this a lot before, but we're at this new moment. Zelensky, after his Oval Office, I don't know, what do you call that? I don't know. It was a moment. He had a moment with Donald Trump, and it didn't go very well. And then he went to Europe, and It went better over there, but not enough, not better enough to compensate for the loss of the United States. And I think what I expected to happen is that he had to come back to the United States, and he did. And there's a ceasefire proposal on the table, and now the ball is in Russia's court. And I remember in our last conversation about this, you asked, well, what's going to be expected of Russia? Where is the pressure on them? And I think we're starting to see some of that. Trump has sort of suggested that he could do terrible damage to Russia financially. He doesn't want to, he says, but he could. And Lavrov has already made some comments about this. And let's just start with your view of where we are now and where you think this is going to go.
Yeah, I mean, my concern has always been with this that, sure, we can kind of pressure Ukraine. They're heavily reliant on us. The question is kind of what leverage do we have on Russia, and what incentive is there for Russia to do a deal? We've now apparently turned back on our arms supply and intelligence sharing after Ukraine did sort of support this ceasefire, and Ukraine then hit targets in Moscow, a kind of sort of wake up call, let's say, or alarm clock for Putin. But I don't know. I mean, I think Russia doesn't seem particularly eager to do a deal. I don't quite know the leverage points that Trump will deploy on Russia. He talked a little bit, I think a couple weeks ago, about even more kind of maximum pressure, where he could kind of flood in sanctions and kind of really grab them by the lapels. But I don't know. I mean, one way to look at it would be to say, well, if Russia is so so reluctant to do a deal, that means they're winning, right? Because they're saying, why should I come to the table? And that paradoxically means that Ukraine should even be more eager to do a deal because they're losing. But I don't know. I'm not sure what the kind of next step is here.
Right. Well, look, I think Russia would be sort of more hesitant at the moment. That's where they have some leverage because of the blow up between Zelensky and Trump, and any smart negotiator would use it at this moment and act as if they're not so eager and jumpy to do a deal, even if they are. I don't know if they are or aren't, but I wouldn't act like I were if I were in their shoes either. I think it's really interesting that one of Zelensky's refrains since the blow up has been that Russia keeps violating ceasefire agreements, and so you can't trust them, which I think is true. But I think it's two things are true at the same time. And I could imagine sitting around the table. I can't really imagine sitting around the table with Lavrov and Putin and all those guys.
That really long table. Yeah.
If I were there and weren't afraid for my life, I would imagine the conversation might be really similar amongst them. There were agreements by the Americans for a long time that we kept violating about moving NATO closer to their borders. So it's one of those fights that's not just between Russia and Ukraine, it seems. America's sort of well in the middle of this and has some responsibility here for where we are. Doesn't take any blame off of Russia for invading. It doesn't take, in my view, I don't know if we agree on this, it doesn't take any blame away from the Ukrainians for their part in it, not their part in starting a war. They did not start the war. I just need to say that so you don't explode all over me. But they did, they have responsibilities here for their behaviors. Let's just say that we don't have to go into again. And I think this is an interesting Americans, again, like to see this as a negotiation by this great superpower, America, that's sort of neutral-ish, and the black hat Russia on one side and the white hat Ukraine on the other. And some people legitimately see it that way. I don't. I think America has been a participant in this war happening, and I think Russians and Ukrainians both have mud on their shoes.
Yeah, but I mean, a couple of things. One is that I think what we're seeing here is an emerging predilection in the Trump administration for these kind of short deals. I mean, it's a little bit like in the Israel-Gaza war where they're trying to extend this temporary ceasefire. And I think we're seeing a similar thing here where they're saying, 30 days. I think that Trump likes that kind of, limited commitment because you can always then change the terms. Right. Art of the deal.
Art of the deal, yeah.
I guess. I mean, I think, aside from sort of a broader question of moral culpability, I think there's just a strategic question here of like, okay, we've kind of brought Ukraine to the table through a mix of sticks, bigger sticks, and a few carrots. Can we get Russia to the table?
Yeah.
And I always thought this was going to be the difficult question. Russia has shown no indication of being interested in a deal. They're adversarial, so we don't have the same leverage we have over Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's sort of the classic thing of like, you only really need to make peace with your enemies, but it's harder to make peace with your enemies than peace with your friends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's fair. I guess I would say, sort of underlying your question, I think, is this sense that Russia just wants perpetual war and wants to sweep through all of Ukraine and perhaps the rest of Europe too. I've never subscribed to that. So not that I put it past them. I don't see the evidence of it. I'm not persuaded. So what would be their incentive to stop the war? Just stopping the war? Maybe they just don't want to be in the war. I don't know. But I don't see it as clear that they want to be continuing the fight.
That's a problem for Trump then, because his whole thing is I'm going to make peace. I mean, that's a specific attitude, a specific policy goal. So I'm just saying, how does he get there? I mean, it would be possible to take an opposite approach, to say I'm in no rush to do a deal. We're going to see how it plays out for another year or two. That's clearly not his position.
Right. That would mean certain death for Ukraine. I mean, he can, unless he's willing to fund it, which he isn't.
Right. It's kind of like, I think people often feel this way about Israel negotiations is, maybe not exactly this one, but in the past, you can put all the pressure in the world on Israel. Ultimately, they're an ally. They have to, in some sense, at least acknowledge the pressure or sort of work with you. But the other side often doesn't, right? And so that's I think where Trump is going to have to figure out where is his leverage over Moscow, and whether it's a carrot or a stick, to get them to, because they have to modulate their demands too. I mean, Russia is claiming territories that no Russian soldier has set foot in. I mean, that's just not going to happen.
Yeah,
right?
well, but that doesn't strike me as so strange. When you're in negotiations in the beginning, you always ask for more than you actually think you're going to get, or maybe they think they're going to get it.
That would be like Ukraine saying we want, and maybe they have said this. I don't know the latest position. I think they have, which is part of the struggle, saying we want all of Crimea back. We want all of. Well, that's obviously not happening either. So you kind of have to.
I think the big request by Russia, which is clearly ridiculous and not going to happen, is the complete demilitarization of the Ukraine and having 8,600 troops left. I mean, that's not going to happen.
That's the end of Ukraine.
Right.
Yeah.
It's sunburn time. You want to go first this time?
Yeah, my sunburn actually is going to be, and I think maybe we'll do this as a permanent feature. Is like sometimes it's sunlight, like a nice thing, and you can choose. Should we end on sunlight then? Are you sunlighty today? I'm sunlighty.
Let's end on sunlight.
Okay, go ahead.
I'll do the rant. I'll be the dark shadow before the sun comes out. My sunburn is it's what's happening in Romania right now, but it's really directed towards the EU. So the Romanian elections happened. Of course, everyone remembers that the Constitutional Court annulled the results because a man named Colin Georgescu won, and he is a populist, and they accused him of being influenced by Russia and having help by the Russians. They submitted a huge document to prove that. I didn't see proof that the Russians helped any more than I've seen how they interfere in elections all over the world every single time in sort of minimal ways. But there was no real, to me, proof that I wasn't persuaded that he won because of them, but I'm not important. So that happened. And then they basically had this, they were going through an election again, and he was way ahead. He was surged even higher than previously. And they just, basically the Romanian government just said, you can't run, you're banned. And which is bad enough, but the EU, this sort of partner we supposedly have in America in democracy around the world, has been celebrating it and supporting his being banned, because they desperately fear populist movements around the world, including in their own countries. And a former EU commissioner, French EU commissioner, Thierry Breton, was actually on a French TV show recently and admitted that he sort of encouraged the Romanian government to ban Georgescu and threatened that this would happen in Germany too, if parties like the FD, continued to rise in the polls and continued to find success there, another populist party on the right. So the great defenders of democracy, actually hate democracy, don't like it when they see it in action, and literally openly say that they're there to fight it every step of the way. So my sunburn is to Monsieur Breton and to everybody in the EU and every European country who doesn't rise up and say, even if they hate the politics of Georgescu's party, that the people actually get to decide.
Paging J.D. Vance in Munich. Right?
Yes.
Right?
I'm going to leave the show and go work with J.D. Vance. Yeah.
Just make sure your sock game is on. My Sunlight this week is actually a lovely show. If you're here in New York, I would encourage everybody to go to the Jewish Museum on Fifth Avenue. There's a show I reviewed. It's called Queen Esther in the Age of Rembrandt. And it tracks how, for both Jews and non-Jews, the image of Esther and Mordecai, obviously well-timed for the holiday of Purim this week, really was an inspiration. And it really touched me 300 years later that you could have a sort of popular culture that celebrated Jewish stories and ideas, that you had really close working and artistic relationships between Jews and non-Jews. Rembrandt famously had lived in the Jewish street in Amsterdam and painted, used Jewish models. And at a time of kind of rising anti-Semitism, an idea of that, and it wasn't patronizing. I mean, Jews really did flourish in Amsterdam, and they were free, and these were the descendants of, and many times conversos themselves, crypto Jews from Spain and Portugal. So it was just a kind of bright spot and a moment of what's possible when a minority feels accepted and can be itself, and is that the benefit goes both ways, and that the Jews enriched the Dutch Golden Age, and that the Dutch Golden Age gave Jews there a real opportunity to thrive. It's a kind of poignant reminder. If you go about 80 blocks downtown to the Center for Jewish History, there's the Anne Frank exhibit, another kind of Dutch princess, obviously, whose story ended much more tragically. So there you have it, the two poles. But Jewish Museum, Fifth Avenue. It's not every day you get to see a Rembrandt. So enjoy.
Yeah, nice, and nice that you ended on the subject of art, because everyone should watch for our Sanity interview, which is going to be released on Sunday. We have a digital art expert from Sotheby's coming to talk to us, and first of all, just tell us what digital art actually is, which will be useful because I don't entirely know, and to share with us what that market looks like and how it relates with crypto and AI and what the future of that market will look like. So we're very into the arts this week.
We are.
Yeah.
Take care.
Have a good week.
Bye.